Oh, yeah. Boy, oh, boy. Is it getting deep in here, folks? I mean, when you've got Republicans and a state senator, no less, from Tennessee that is actively killing pro-Second Amendment bills, you got to realize, folks, where we're at. This is a conspiracy. It's a conspiracy of traitors. I don't care what their labels are. I don't care what they call themselves. I don't care what kind of suits they wear, whether they call themselves red or blue. The Senate Republicans on the 18th of March in Tennessee voted to kill a pro-Second Amendment bill that would have given Tennessee citizens protection from federal gun laws. Their Senate Bill 1607 would have made it illegal for state employees and agencies. This is the same thing as the Missouri Second Amendment Preservation Act, same one that Kansas passed, same one that Arizona or Alaska passed, same one many other states have passed. Slight variations, but all the same. It would have made it illegal for state employees and agencies to, quote, cooperate to impose, collect, enforce, or effectuate any fine, penalty, or other federal enactment or federal enforcement action in this state relating to firearms. Any federal enactment relating to firearms, accessories, or ammunition is void in this state, says the bill. Any federal enactment or federal enforcement action impacting or infringing upon the rights of individuals or entities relative to firearms, firearm accessories, or ammunition is void in this state. The state senators are voting against it, and they're Republicans. Anyone found violating the law would have been guilty of a Class A misdemeanor, leading up to possible Class C felony charges for subsequent multiple offenses. The final vote was 3-4. One person abstained. In this case, just an abstention does not relieve you of the guilt of treason. Republican Senators Campfield, Green, and Bell, all of them voted in favor of the bill. They joined Senator Finney, a Democrat, Republican Senators Kelsey, Overby, and Stevens, who voted to kill the bill. Ford, a Democrat, abstained. Those people in the Republican side who voted against it, you know what they used as their excuse? Federal law is supreme over state law. Is that so? You know, treason doesn't really have a justification. There is no justification for treason, irrespective of what a tyrant may tell you. The whole of the Bill of Rights is a declaration of the right of the people at large, or considered as individuals. It establishes some rights of the individual as unalienable, and which consequently no majority has a right to deprive them of. That was Albert Gallatin. Jefferson himself said, and here's your answer for those people that say the federal law is supreme. Really? Okay. So let's hear what Thomas Jefferson, who wrote the Constitution, had to say about that. He says, on every question of the Constitution and construction, let us carry ourselves back to the time when the Constitution was adopted. We recollect the spirit manifested in the debates, and instead of trying what meaning may be squeezed out of the text or invented against it, we conform to the probable one on which it was passed. So in other words, we don't go back and we try to second guess what the founders were thinking. We just do what it says. And it says, shall not be infringed. Even the courts, as corrupt as they are, have repeatedly stated the same thing. Now, granted, in years past. The maintenance of the right to bear arms is a most essential one to every free people and should not be whittled down by technical construction. Construction is a legal term for how do we interpret the text. And what this judge is saying very clearly is that the right to bear arms is essential for every free person and should not be whittled away and chopped down and chipped away at by technical construction. Technical being the federal law is supreme over state law. Because, see, the Constitution supersedes any federal law itself, period. You can't have law passed by Congress people after the Constitution that overrides it, not without a constitutional amendment, voiding the federal Constitution itself. Here's another judge. The provision in the Constitution granting the right to all persons to bear arms is a limitation upon the power of the legislature to enact any law to the contrary. The exercise of a right guaranteed by the Constitution cannot be made subject to the will of the sheriff. That was in 1922. 1859, Cockrum versus State. The right of a citizen to bear arms in lawful defense of himself or the state is absolute. He does not derive it from the state government. It is one of the high powers delegated directly to the citizen and, quote, is accepted out of the general powers of government. A law cannot be passed to infringe upon or impair it because it is above the law and independent of the law-making power. Now, when he says it is accepted out of the general powers of government, he doesn't mean accepted as in I accept. He means accepted as in this is separate. Accepted, exempted, accepted outside. E-X-C-E-P-T-E-D. It is excluded out of the general powers of government. Separate, held above. Ladies and gentlemen, your own representatives in Tennessee have betrayed you. The Supremacy Clause is, and its use by state representatives to wash their hands like Pontius Pilate of a hot potato issue that they don't want to touch because they're afraid of their own career is inexcusable. And it is the highest form of betrayal, as evidenced by the enduring legacy of Pontius Pilate himself. This article says, these Republicans who voted against the bill attempted to cite federal law that was supreme over state law. The Republicans are misinterpreting the clause. The clause reads, quote, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which shall be made in pursuance thereof. Now remember, this Constitution and the laws of the United States, which must be made in pursuance of the Constitution and the laws of the United States, and all treaties made and which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. What this means is that only those laws which are actually in pursuant of the Constitution itself and the protections envisioned or enwrapped in that Constitution can be considered supreme. See, the idea of the Supremacy Clause was simply this. A state could not pass a law which would violate the Bill of Rights. In other words, you can't have a state that says free speech is prohibited in North Carolina. You can't have a state that says, in California, we restrict your gun rights. You can't have a state that says, in Wyoming, you don't have any Fourth Amendment protection against illegal search and seizure of your premise or your property or your home or your person. You can't have that. What they're saying is that Supremacy Clause says that states cannot make a law that supersedes those rights, which are separate and exempted from government's touch. Government may not touch them in any way, shape, or form. First Amendment, Second, Third, Fourth, Fifth, Sixth, Seventh, Eighth, Ninth, and 10th. They are exempted. They are excluded from government's meddling, interference, touch, influence, infringement. And no law can be made unless it is in pursuance of the advancement of those principles. We have never given Congress the authority to strip us of our God-given rights. I can't say it strenuously enough. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So if you won't take it from me, I'm going to give it to you from the mouth of the judges themselves, who actually at this point still honored the Constitution in 1846. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. The right of the whole people, old and young, men, women, and boys, and not militia only, to keep and bear arms of every description, and not such merely as are used by the militia, shall not be infringed, curtailed, or broken in upon, in the smallest degree, and all this for the important end to be attained, the rearing up and qualifying a well-regulated militia, so vitally necessary to the security of a free state. Our opinion is that any law, state or federal, is repugnant to the Constitution and void, which contravenes this right. Ladies and gentlemen, that's from the mouth of a judge. So if you say, the founders didn't know what they were talking about, our judges today are wiser. They better understood what the founders meant than the founders themselves did. Say you're not satisfied, say you want more for your money, tell you what I'm going to do. Here's another one. For in principle, there is no difference between a law prohibiting the wearing of concealed arms and a law forbidding the wearing such as are exposed. And if the former be unconstitutional, the latter must be so likewise. But it should not be forgotten that it is not only a part of the right that is secured by the Constitution, it is the right entire and complete as it existed at the adoption of the Constitution. And if any portion of that right is impaired, immaterial how small that part may be, and immaterial the order of time at which it is done, it is equally forbidden by the Constitution. Bliss versus the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The neighboring state. See, the problem here, folks, is that we have completely and utterly neglected to follow that which we know to be right and correct and true. James Madison told us in Federalist 46, it isn't certain that with this aid alone, the possession of weapons, the people would not be able to shake off their yokes. But were the people to possess the additional advantage of local governments chosen by themselves, who could collect the national will and direct the national force, and of officers appointed out of the militia by these governments and attached both to them and to the militia, it may be affirmed with the greatest assurance that the throne of every tyranny in Europe would be speedily overturned, in spite of the legions which surround it. You see, these guys actually had the real-world experience of what tyranny is and does and how it affects the lives of everyday people. And they made it clear that the one principle that could not be assailed, could not be touched, whittled away, chipped away at, was your right to weapons. Not weapons of ancient origin, but weapons that were similar, equal, and combined to equal whatever force the military and the government itself has. Jefferson said, "What country can preserve its liberties if their rulers are not warned from time to time that their people preserve the spirit of resistance? Let them take arms." Here's the real crux of this, ladies and gentlemen. And this was John Trenchard and Thomas Gordon in a series of essays called in Cato's Letters and Essays on Liberty. And this sums it up. This expresses who these senators in Tennessee are. This expresses who the governor is of Missouri when he vetoed the Second Amendment Preservation Act. This expresses to you very clearly who Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi and Dianne Feinstein are. This expresses to you who the President of the United States is in his rabid and manic effort to strip you of your right of self-defense and your right to defend and protect your country and move it back in time to a point where their tyranny was not paramount. Here it is, and it's one simple sentence. You should write this down. And you should, I don't care if you make it, if you write it on, if you get it printed on a t-shirt, if you write it on your hand and you read it off as you meet people every day. Because it expresses everything people need to hear in one succinct sentence. Men that are above all fear soon grow above all shame. Men who have no fear soon have no shame. And ladies and gentlemen, we have an aristocracy that has grown in this nation that has no fear. And they have proven themselves to be abundantly above the principles and the concept of shame. They could care less what you think of them, because they only have to meet you every 2 or 6 years. They couldn't care less whether or not you like them or not. All they're interested in is the achievement of their own personal improvement, whether that's in power or money or career. It makes no difference. These are all men and women who are above fear, and therefore they are above all shame. Men that are above all fear soon grow above all shame. Think back and put that into its perspective, and look at every tyrannical, abusive dictatorship, authoritarian regime, totalitarianism. Pick what you want. I don't care whether you call it and label it communism and socialism and whatever you name it. Fascism. They're all the same. You see, they are nothing other than legal constructions to separate and divide you, because they don't want you arguing about whether we've fallen into authoritarianism. They want you arguing about whether it's socialism, fascism, or communism. It doesn't matter. It's all antithetical to the concept and the principles of liberty. You see, without the principles and the understanding that we have an obligation to stand up and protect ourselves in the present day, in the present state, from these tyrants in government. And they are tyrants, make no mistake about it. I don't care whether they're in Tennessee or whether they're a governor of Missouri or whether they are the president or a senator in the Washington, D.C. area. Makes no difference. They're all the same. Their faces may be different. Their families may be different. Their principles and their ideology of power at all costs is the same. You see, and I got to tell you, these aren't even concepts which fall in upon the founders of the United States. Machiavelli in The Prince wrote, "You must understand that there are two ways of fighting, by law or by force. The first way is natural to men, and the second to beasts. But as the first way often proves inadequate, one must often recourse to the second." You see, government rules by force and by law. However, the passage of a law does not justify their use of force. The force of government, the police power of government, to legalize tyranny. You cannot do so. The two are diametrically opposed. They cannot be further from the truth. You know, just to put it into a perspective that draws the immediate analogy for you, you cannot get a priest of the Satanic Church who is going to save you for Christ, no matter how much you try. When you see states that have, and states should be the last bulwark of defense over a federal government before the people themselves must take up arms to defend their own interest. We elect state representatives to do exactly that on our behalf. And when they fail, as they obviously are, they leave us no choice. Edward Abbey wrote in 1979, "The tank, the B-52, the fighter bomber, the state-controlled police and military are the weapons of dictatorship. The rifle is the weapon of democracy. If guns are outlawed, only the government will have guns. Only the police, the secret police, the military, the hired servants of our rulers. Only the government and a few outlaws. If that be so, I intend to be among the outlaws." Edward Abbey, The Right to Bear Arms, 1979. Joseph Story, and I'm going to leave you with this because we're down to last 2 minutes. "The right of the citizens to keep and bear arms has justly been considered as the palladium of the liberties of a republic. Since it offers a strong moral check against the usurpation and arbitrary power of rulers, and will generally, even if these are successful in the first instance, enable the people to resist and triumph over them. And yet, though this truth would seem to be so clear, and the importance of a well-regulated militia would seem so undeniable, it cannot be disguised that among the American people there is a growing indifference to any system of militia discipline, and a strong disposition, from a sense of its burthens, to be rid of all regulation. How it is practicable to keep the people duly armed without some organization, it is difficult to see. There is certainly no small danger that indifference may lead to disgust, and disgust to contempt, and thus gradually undermine all the protection intended by the clause of our National Bill of Rights." And ladies and gentlemen, that is where we find ourselves today. There is no honor. There is no integrity in what these men have done in Tennessee. There is no honor in what the governor of Missouri did a year ago. This year, they're about to pass it again. Won't it be a tragedy if he finds another excuse of tyranny to evade his obligation and duty? It's going to come down to something ugly, folks. I hope you realize that. Because we have failed to hold back the horde of evil. We'll be right back.